Story number 1, Foundation Report. I arrived at the Westbrook Juvenile Detention Center on a Tuesday morning in late October. The building sat on 40 acres of overgrown grounds about 90 miles north of Albany, a 4-story concrete structure built in 1968. My assignment was straightforward: conduct the mandatory pre-demolition environmental survey, document hazardous materials locations, and recommend abatement procedures. The facility had been closed for 11 years following litigation, and January demolition was already scheduled. I checked in at the gate with the site supervisor, a man named Carlisle, who had been hired to oversee the property until the wrecking crews arrived. He gave me the master keys and a brief tour of the exterior. The building was in the condition I expected: boarded windows, deteriorated masonry, standing water in the courtyard. Standard pre-demolition assessment work. The administrative wing was my first priority. I needed to document asbestos locations, lead paint, PCB containing equipment, and any other regulated materials. The hallways were dim even with my flashlight. Dust lay thick on every surface. Filing cabinets lined the walls of the main office, their drawers hanging open. I began my systematic documentation, photographing, measuring, recording air quality readings. That was when I noticed the clocks. There were 4 wall clocks visible from the administrative hub. One in the main office, one in the records room, one in the medical station, and one in the cafeteria entrance. All of them had stopped at 3:17. I noted this in my field notebook as a probable electrical surge during final shutdown. It was a minor detail, but I recorded it anyway. Protocol requires comprehensive documentation. I spent the rest of Tuesday in the administrative spaces and the basement mechanical rooms. The boiler room showed significant asbestos wrapping on the old steam pipes. The electrical room contained transformers that would need proper disposal. I collected samples, took photographs, and filled 3 pages of my notebook with measurements and observations. The air quality readings were normal throughout these areas. I returned to my hotel in town before dark. Wednesday morning, I began the residential cell blocks. This was the larger portion of the survey work. The building contained 4 residential wings, each with 36 individual cells arranged in 2 tiers. I would need to sample air quality in representative cells, document any materials of concern, and assess structural integrity for the demolition team. I started in the east wing, ground floor. The cells were small, perhaps 8 feet by 10 feet, with steel bunks and concrete floors. The air was stale but not unusual. I took readings with my calibrated air quality monitor: oxygen, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, volatile organic compounds. All readings were within normal ranges for an abandoned building. I moved to the second cell. The monitor showed elevated carbon monoxide. I recorded the reading 42 parts per million. That was unusual. There was no source of combustion in the cell. No boiler nearby, no vehicle exhaust, nothing that would produce carbon monoxide. I recalibrated the monitor and took another reading: 45 parts per million. I made a note and moved to the third cell to verify the pattern. The third cell showed normal readings. The fourth cell showed elevated carbon monoxide again: 51 parts per million. I went back to the second cell to verify. Normal readings this time. I continued through the wing, and the pattern persisted. Elevated readings would appear in a cell I had not yet tested, then disappear when I returned to verify them. The readings always stayed exactly 1 cell ahead of my position, as if the monitor was detecting something that moved through the building at the pace of my survey. I attempted to call the regional office to report the anomaly, and request a secondary monitoring team. My cell phone showed full signal in the parking lot, but inside the building I had no bars. I tried multiple times throughout the day. The signal would not return. By Wednesday evening, I had documented the pattern through all 4 residential wings. The readings were consistent and repeatable in their inconsistency. I did not have an explanation. I recorded what I observed and returned to my hotel to review my notes. Thursday morning, I opened my field notebook to continue my documentation, and I found that the first 2 days of my survey had been replaced. The pages I had written, my initial observations, my clock notation, my carbon monoxide readings, my photographs and measurements, were gone. In their place were handwritten incident reports dated from 2008. The reports described disciplinary actions taken against residents. They listed resident ID numbers, infraction dates, and punishment details. The handwriting was not mine. The ink appeared old, the paper slightly yellowed. I checked my backup documentation. My camera contained all my photographs. My voice recorder held my audio notes. The physical evidence of my survey work was intact, but my written field notebook had been altered with documents that should not have existed. I did not attempt to explain this. I completed my survey using only my camera and voice recorder. I avoided the residential wings entirely on Thursday and focused on the administrative and mechanical spaces. I documented the asbestos, the lead paint, the electrical hazards. I gathered sufficient material to complete an official report. My final report to the regional office cited structural instability and recommended immediate demolition without abatement procedures. This recommendation would trigger an emergency exemption from standard EPA abatement requirements. The department would accept the standard fine for emergency procedures. The building would be demolished without delay. The demolition was scheduled for 4 days later. I was not present for it. My field notes were transferred to a regional supervisor named Patterson. I have since attempted to verify Patterson's employment with the department. His name does not appear in any directory I have checked. The phone number I was given does not connect to any office I can locate. My assignment file was closed with a status notation of survey completed, recommendations implemented, no follow-up required. The incident has been officially archived. I have not been assigned to any other pre-demolition assessments since that time. Story number 2, Freight Corridor. I arrived at the Highwood Freight Depot on the morning of November 14th to conduct a routine quarterly safety compliance review of rail maintenance equipment and worker certifications. The weather was clear. The facility sat approximately 12 miles east of the county line, accessible by a 2-lane service road that had been recently resurfaced. I signed in at the gate at 8:53 in the morning. Garrett, the site supervisor, met me in the administrative building with the standard orientation materials. He was a man in his middle 50s who had worked at Highwood for 14 years. During the initial walkthrough of the maintenance bays, he mentioned that third shift had reported hearing what they described as metal breathing near the southbound inspection pit. He attributed it to thermal expansion in the undercarriage lift system, which was standard equipment for heavy rail inspection work. I made a note of the report and continued with the scheduled documentation review. I spent the morning examining certifications, lockout procedures, and equipment maintenance logs. I found several standard violations, 3 missing lockout tags on hydraulic systems, 2 expired harness certifications among the maintenance crew, and incomplete documentation on the last calibration cycle for the pressure testing apparatus. These were routine findings. I photographed the violations and entered them into the compliance database in real time. At approximately 1100 hours, I proceeded to the pit access tunnel to verify ventilation system functionality. This was part of the standard quarterly protocol. The tunnel provided access to the inspection pit where the undercarriage lift operated. It was a confined space, and ventilation compliance was critical. The air pressure gauge at the tunnel entrance read -4.7. This reading was impossible. The ventilation system was designed to push air outward from the confined space, maintaining positive pressure. A negative reading indicated the system was drawing air inward, which should not occur during normal operation. I checked the gauge against my calibration reference. The gauge was functional. I looked at the control panel mounted beside the entrance. The indicators showed normal operation. The intake fans registered as running at full capacity. The exhaust fans showed standard output. The system appeared to be functioning according to all measurable parameters. I went back to find Garrett. I asked him about the ventilation system status. He told me it had been physically disconnected from external controls since the previous Thursday. He said it was running on what he called residual momentum. I asked him to clarify. He said the system had been shut down for maintenance, but when they attempted to restart it, the fans continued running even though the control switches were in the off position. He said it had been running continuously for 4 days. He said it was not causing any problems, so they had left it alone. I returned to the tunnel entrance. I attempted to manually override the fan assembly. The override was a mechanical switch designed to force the system into standby mode regardless of electrical input. I located the switch and engaged it. The fans did not stop. I observed the metal housing of the intake fan assembly. It was expanding and contracting in a rhythm that did not correlate with motor function. The expansion occurred over approximately 3 seconds, followed by contraction over approximately 2 seconds. The cycle repeated continuously. The temperature differential between the expanded and contracted states was significant enough that I could feel the change in ambient air temperature at a distance of 2 feet from the housing. This violated basic thermodynamic principles. A motor-driven fan assembly should not generate temperature cycling independent of mechanical friction or electrical fluctuation. The motor itself was running at a steady operational temperature. I did not touch the housing again. I made the decision to classify the ventilation system as critically non-compliant and recommended immediate depot shutdown. This exceeded my authorization level. Standard protocol required me to document the violation and submit it for regional review, which would have taken between 5 and 7 business days. The situation presented an observable safety compromise that I was trained to recognize and act upon within discretionary limits. I invoked Section 4.3 of the Compliance Manual, which permitted field-level shutdown recommendations when confined space ventilation integrity could not be verified. I informed Garrett that the depot would need to cease operations in the inspection pit area until the ventilation system could be inspected and repaired by external contractors. I recommended full depot shutdown as a precautionary measure. Garrett did not argue. He made a phone call to the regional office while I completed my documentation. Regional office accepted my report with minimal questioning. The conversation lasted approximately 4 minutes. The official I spoke with, whose name I did not record, indicated that my assessment had been noted and that the depot would be reclassified for infrastructure replacement rather than repair. He said all third shift personnel would be reassigned to the Shelby facility without standard transfer processing. He said, I should submit my documentation under administrative seal and that my compliance certification would be extended for an additional 2-year period without the standard re-examination requirement. I did not ask why the extension was being granted. I did not ask why the depot was being demolished rather than repaired. I completed the paperwork, sealed the file, and left the facility at 4:15 in the afternoon. The depot was fully demolished by March of the following year. I received confirmation of the demolition through routine administrative notification. My subsequent assignments have not included any facilities within a 70-mile radius of that location. I have not been asked to provide additional documentation regarding the Highwood facility, and no follow-up inquiries have been submitted. The incident has been filed under administrative seal and closed to further review. Story number 3, billing discrepancy. I was assigned to Ridgeline Urgent Care in late March following a routine audit flag. The claim's submission pattern showed 73 patient intakes logged between 9 in the evening and 6 in the morning across 4 separate nights, all attributed to a single physician, Dr. Marcus Webb. The throughput was impossible. No urgent care facility with one doctor and standard staffing could process that volume without violating state regulations on patient safety and documentation standards. My job was to determine whether the billing was fraudulent or whether the facility had misreported staffing levels to justify inflated claims. The facility director, a woman named Patricia Hendricks, granted me complete access without resistance. She seemed almost relieved when I arrived. She walked me through the records room, the billing system, and the surveillance setup, then offered me keys to the building and a schedule of when the night shift operated. She mentioned, in passing, that Dr. Webb had resigned 2 weeks prior without providing notice. She did not seem concerned about this. She said the facility had already hired a replacement. I spent the first 3 days reviewing intake logs and cross-referencing them with billing codes, prescription records, and physical chart documentation. The numbers were consistent across all systems. 73 patients on the night of March 8th, 68 on March 9th, 81 on March 12th, all between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., all under Dr. Webb's signature. But the handwriting was wrong. The intake logs, the initial patient information sheets filled out at the front desk, were in one hand. Clean, practiced, consistent. The clinical notes were in a different hand, shakier, rushed, and within individual charts, the handwriting changed. Mid-sentence sometimes. Once, in a chart for a patient named Robert Kellerman, the word hypertension began in one hand and finished in another. The change happened in the middle of the letter, and I flagged this and requested surveillance footage from the nights in question. The footage showed normal patterns during the early evening. Patients arriving, checking in, waiting, being called back. The waiting room had standard capacity, but beginning around 9:30 p.m., the camera recorded in normal intervals until it suddenly stopped. 7 minutes missing. Then it resumed. 12 minutes missing. Then 9. These gaps appeared throughout each night shift, scattered at irregular intervals. Not a malfunction. The camera continued recording before and after each gap. The gaps were clean, precise, like edited footage, except I watched the original files on the facility's server, and the modification dates showed no alterations. I called the former night nurse, a woman named Sarah Chen. She had worked at Ridgeline for 8 years and left the same week Dr. Webb resigned. I reached her at a number listed in the personnel file. She was reluctant to speak, but she answered my questions. I asked her about the intake volume. She said it was accurate. I asked her about Dr. Webb. She said she would not discuss him. I asked her about the handwriting discrepancies in the charts. There was a long silence. Then she said she had stopped reading the charts after she realized she was writing notes for patients she had never called back to the exam rooms. She said this happened 3 times before she noticed the pattern. She said she did not know how the charts were being completed. She said she quit because she could not explain it to herself. She hung up after that. I drove to Ridgeline on the evening of March 27th, a Thursday. I parked my vehicle in the lot facing the front entrance and waited. The facility was open. I could see the front desk staff through the windows. I had no specific plan. I wanted to observe the night shift beginning. At 9:15 p.m., the intake printer inside the facility started running. I could hear it from the parking lot. I waited 5 minutes, then entered through the front door. The printer had generated a stack of patient information sheets. I picked them up. The first sheet was for a patient named David Hutchins, appointment scheduled for 9 p.m., chief complaint listed as lower back pain. The second was for Margaret Yates, 9:43 p.m. migraine. The third was for James Portman, 9:58 p.m. upper respiratory infection. The waiting room was empty except for the front desk receptionist, a young man I had not seen during my earlier visits. I asked him if these patients had arrived yet. He looked confused. He said no one had checked in since 7 p.m. I asked him if he had printed these sheets. He said no. He said the printer was automated. He said it printed patient information at scheduled intervals. I sat in the waiting room. At 9:29 p.m., David Hutchins walked through the front door. At 9:43 p.m., Margaret Yates arrived. At 9:58 p.m., James Portman entered. Each one checked in with the receptionist. Each one was called back to an exam room within 2 minutes of arrival. I stood and walked toward the clinical area. A nurse stopped me and asked for my credentials. I showed her my investigator's license. She made a phone call. Patricia Hendricks appeared and asked me to wait in the records room. I complied. 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. A door opened somewhere deeper in the facility. I heard a patient's voice, calm and distant, describing symptoms. Then silence, then another voice, then another patient. The sounds continued for the next 2 hours. I remained in the records room. No one came to collect me. At 11:15 p.m., I left the building. I submitted my preliminary findings the next morning. I recommended immediate closure pending a formal investigation by the State Medical Board. I noted the handwriting discrepancies, the surveillance gaps, the impossible throughput, and the circumstances of Dr. Webb's resignation. I recommended that all charts from the disputed nights be reviewed by a third party, and that the facility's billing be suspended pending audit completion. I received a response from my supervisor on March 29th. The case was to be reclassified as a billing software malfunction. The facility's vendor had apparently updated their system, and the update had caused erratic timestamp generation and duplicate patient entries in the logs. This explained the handwriting discrepancies. They were artifacts of the software error. The surveillance gaps were a known issue with the camera model. I was instructed to approve the vendor change and close the file. The facility's billing would be adjusted downward by a standard reconciliation amount, and the matter would be resolved. I did as instructed. Ridgeline Urgent Care closed voluntarily on April 4th. The owner, Patricia Hendricks, cited early retirement. The building was sold to a regional hospital network within 3 weeks. It remains unopened. I have driven past it twice. The parking lot is empty. The windows are dark. I was reassigned to commercial property claims in May. My supervisor indicated this was a standard rotation. The case file was transferred to an internal department. I have not been able to locate which one. The transfer documentation lists only a case number and a signature I cannot read. I have not been contacted regarding Ridgeline since April.